Hello there! Welcome to another of Handy Andy's little videos to help us along and understand some of the things within our care home. So what we're looking at today, we've got what often people call the nurse call bell or alarm system or whatever you wish. This is the ENS system provided by Eclipse, who are based in the Isle of Man, and a number of our homes have these. Nice and simple. It's one of the things I love about them because I am quite simple. So let's begin. There's essentially only 3 buttons on here, which makes things a lot easier. The nice big accessible button here is the general call bell. So it's so big that people can see it and able to hit it. Doesn't matter if you hit it square, because actually behind here are 2 little micro switches. So if a resident were to push at the side or one edge of it, it would still trigger. It's very clever. Of course, when that is pressed, you'll see a signal light here. So this red LED will flash. You might just be able to hear outside in the corridor. That's now ringing in the corridor and showing up on the display, but we'll take a look at that later. How do we stop this? Well, there's a green button here that says reset. Press this once, and it has stopped. Say that quite carefully. I'd see a lot of people repeatedly pressing the reset buttons, mainly out of panic. Sometimes there is a little bit of a delay of about 5 seconds between hitting that button, it receiving in the unit, and then clearing. Try to avoid pressing more than once. This is actually a way that the batteries do run out quite quickly by doing so. So there's 2 of our 3 buttons, we're nearly there. We've got a red button and it's labelled alarm. By pressing this is triggering an emergency response. What kind of things could this be? Maybe you enter a room, a resident needs some assistance very urgently. For example, CPR, maybe they've fallen, maybe they're choking. You hit that button on its own once. Again, you'll see the same light, but you may notice that this alarm now is a long, continuous tone. This shows a complete difference to the previous one, which was a nice gentle beep, and this will continue to ring. So how do we stop this? Same again, press reset once, and then the bells end. So, how do we use the emergency alarm properly? As I said earlier, you might come into a room, somebody needs some attendance very quickly. It could also be yourself. Maybe you go into a room and we have a volatile resident and you're being attacked. Again, hitting that red button means that you'll get some help quite quickly. If, however, you've pressed this red button, or you attend a room where the red button has been pressed, you arrive and you realise that they're waiting for the nurse to attend, do not cancel the alarm. So don't reset the alarm, just leave that running until the nurse attends. One of the reasons for this is once you reset that and then trigger it again, people start to think, oh, maybe it's not important, or maybe there's a fault with the system, I'll ignore it. This leaves too much delay in getting a nurse to where you need to be. Now, if you're a carer and you hear the alarm call, you must immediately go to the display unit to see where the alarm's being called from and attend as soon as possible. Maybe they need a number of people to help, okay? You may also notice on this unit that there's an input, a little hole here. This is a 3/4 inch jack input as an auxiliary to allow us to add extra equipment. Could be the trigger bell, or we'll call it pair push, that the residents can press for attendance themselves. Could be a false mat or a sensor mat, as I've got here. It could be wireless equipment, it could be infrared, PIR assistance, all of these types of things. And they all work on the same basic principle. So I'm just going to use this mat as an example. So they come with just the cable up to here, and then you buy separately what they call the pigtail, which connects onto it to a mono jack. Just note on here, one side has arrows, they should both be on the same side, and the other side does not have arrows, and those without should be on the same side too. Nice and simple, just pushes into the auxiliary all the way in. Make sure there's no gap. It should then start to trigger. You can press reset. And you can pop this down on the ground. And you can just press the mat to test it. You should always test equipment before you leave the room. You can then log this onto the PCS system. But we've got a bit of a problem here now, because I've got my floor mat in here, but what if my resident wants to call me? And they're quite entitled to, and the facility being taken away from them can actually be seen as a bit of a safeguarding issue. Well, nice simple solution, a double socket splitter. So you might see some of these things in kind of small black plastic units, or like this with a bit of extra cable on them. So very easily, we're going to take that out. We're going to put the falls mat in one of them. Put that in there. We're going to put the pair push in the other. We're going to hit reset before the nurse shouts at me. And then what are we going to do? We're going to test it. That one works. Now it's reset, we test the mat. Perfect. Just a quick note about the mats themselves. So the way they work is they've got two like wire mesh sides with like a gel in between. So imagine like two bits of chicken wire, okay? And it sits separate with the gel. As soon as the mat is stood on, it then makes contact with each other, which provides the circuit, which then triggers the alarm bell. Why am I explaining this? To remind you that that's how they work, and therefore please do not store them folded. They are delivered to us flat, and they should remain flat throughout the rest of their usage. Don't store them folded, don't store heavy things on top of them, because once that gel in the middle is gone or it makes a permanent contact, it can no longer be used, and of course they are quite expensive. These units are mounted to the wall with the facility of all these additional cables, etc., which makes things quite convenient. It means that we don't need to take this off the wall and put it on a table next to a resident. We can simply plug in one of these and give the resident this. If this were to get damaged, maybe by that cup of tea falling over, this system costs about £10 to £12. This system getting damaged is closer to £200. So there's absolutely no real need to remove this from the wall. However, if you ever were to have to do this, let me tell you how. In the middle here, there's a little button you're going to push against the wall, very gently, but against the wall. Then with the other hand, you're going to push this up and then forward. Okay? And you see that it slots onto here, and this little device here just holds it into place. The only real reason to take this off the wall is for the maintenance guys when they're changing batteries or doing maintenance work on them. However, I'm putting it into this video because unfortunately I find these damaged all too often. It's back on the wall. Another thing to consider when you're plugging in things like the falls mats, etc., is are you actually creating a bigger risk? Having all of these extra cables hanging around, sprawled across the floor, could potentially be a bigger falls risk than the one that you're trying to resolve. So please do consider carefully where you trace the cable. And if it's impossible to not create a trip hazard, then maybe consider using some wireless equipment instead. So here we now are in the corridor by one of the display units. And I've taken this out of the room only for demonstration purposes. I will put it back, of course. So when a yellow bell is pressed, the same as pushing a push pair, it's the equivalent of the yellow. It makes a noise, and you can see it's come up here, TT bedroom 12. It says bedroom because, of course, we also have these things in the bathroom, which we're going to take a look at just later on. Now, the carer should go from here to TT12, see what the resident needs are, and press reset on the box. And then, of course, it stops in the corridor. Unfortunately, what we have found are some staff who are doing this. Now that's silenced this in the corridors on every display unit. The call is still going through. It still shows on the screen, but of course nobody's going to look at that. I appreciate that sometimes people press this when they're on the way to the resident to avoid distress for other residents. However, you and I both know anything can happen between here and getting to that resident where maybe your attention has been diverted. So please do not silence call bells in the corridor. Go to the resident, hit the reset, and then it's all fine. Okay, you'll have to forgive the noise of the fan in the background, I'm afraid. But here's an example of a unit in the bathroom. The difference here, of course, is we don't have any auxiliary input, but we do have an orange pull cord. This is the equivalent of pressing the yellow button. Somebody can pull this, and as you can see, it'll beep here. On the display unit, it will say TT12WC, as in toilet. What's this for? Well, this is in case somebody falls. However, you may notice a distinct problem here. Somebody in their wisdom has decided to tie this so tightly up that it's no longer touching the floor. If a resident were on the floor, then they would not be able to call for assistance. Again, this is a safeguarding issue. Please ensure that all of the orange cords are as close to the ground without touching as possible. Also, don't allow anybody to tie these around bars, etc. or tidy them up around here. It removes the safety function. Removing a safety function in a workplace can be a disciplinary offence. We're going to look at the nurse call boxes now actually attached to doors, particularly final exit doors, fire doors on the ground floor. Camera around so we can have a look. So, here is where we had the auxiliary input in the rooms. It's been replaced by a key. Everything else is pretty much the same. Here, however, we've two magnets. So what happens is when these two magnets are separated by the door opening, it will trigger the alarm. In order to reset this, these magnets must be back in place, i.e., unless you close the door, it will not reset. It would be better to turn the alarm off before opening the door. In order to do this, you'll need a key that looks like this. Written on it is 901. Very often these are kind of kept on nurse stations or senior bunches. Now I've actually written on mine, upwards is on, and to the left is off. So if I turn this to this position, I should be able to open this door and close this door without any problems.